welcome to the Museum of Graffiti's Artist Talk. We're really excited to have you on. We consider you a legend and a super important artist to the culture. So we want to have a good talk with you today about your story. And
yeah.
So if I can, let me just flip my screen so I can read a bit about you to folks that are joining us. Sabre is a legendary West Coast style writer and contemporary artist who is most famous for an exceptionally large piece that he did on the concrete bank of the Los Angeles River in 1997. The full color piece took 97 gallons of paint and 35 nights spread out over the course of a year to complete. This final work, measuring 250 by 55 feet, has been called the largest graffiti painting ever, and the work was viewable from satellite. One other thing to note about Sabre is that he filmed a video of himself painting an American flag and painting words over it, and people said that he was desecrating the American flag. And Sabre had many discussions with news networks such as Fox and MSNBC. As he was quoted on his website, "It was never my intention to insult or disrespect anyone. The decision was to paint the flag, was to show it as a living, breathing, changing organism that represented me as an American trying to manage this lifelong disease of epilepsy without health care." Besides that, you are a very successful contemporary painter, and you have this tremendous history in art that I think people will be really excited to learn about, because it's not just you, it's in your history. So we want to get to know who Sabre is, and will the real Sabre stand up, right? So tell us a little bit about your history and how you started and how you became Sabre.
I'd say skateboarding was key to introduction to kind of way into the city. And as I skated, I learned about graffiti and saw tagging, saw big burners, and skateboarding graphics, the challenge of like looking at graphics. Those two things really kind of brought me into, skateboarding is where I saw my first real like inspiration piece was a Risky piece at Venice Yard. Man, this was like 90, this was 80, 89, maybe 88.
Sabre, but wasn't it in your family history, the art, the creativity?
Yeah, that's my grandfather right there. He was out of Connecticut. His name was Euclid Shook. That's actually my father as a boy, holding the firearm, and that's his family friend posing for the narrative of the son finds his dad's gun that's loaded. And he's trying to clean the gun to impress his father, but he doesn't know that the gun is loaded. So that's kind of the narrative. Well, I guess we all know what that narrative is. I mean, that one's
so to speak, that the talent ran in your family, right? It wasn't just your grandfather; it was your parents. Before graffiti came into your life, you were exposed to art, and then all of a sudden you discover graffiti.
Yeah, then it was.
And so as you think about this, about when you were younger and you got into, you mentioned that you started really young, and you started noticing it through skateboarding and skateboard graphics. You were living in Glendale at the time, which was a hub, and you had mentioned the importance. At that time, at 11 years old in 1989, that the Slick and Hex battle had a huge impact on you.
Oh, the Hex and Slick battle was one of the most epic things I was able to see in person, and to smell that yard with all the cans just rotting on the ground, and the epic size of those burners. I mean, I was just a little kid then, and to be able to see that, and I have photos of it. I remember just staring at those photos, just trying to figure out how they painted with those tips, and how is it possible to even paint like that? Like almost like sorcerers or something. You know, it was just so over the top. I mean, that and going to Belmont, Venice, that was a big challenge. See, Venice was always a challenge because you had Shoreline Crip and you had Venice 13 always running in out of there, and you better at least know somebody. So, you know, I mean, when I was a kid, I think Shoreline jacked my board. I was a little kid, and Pep, the photographer, he was down there. He grabbed it from them and got it back for me. And man, I didn't even know what was going on at the time. You know, Venice.
We were talking about crews back then, and you said you made a crew just for yourself at one point, but eventually
Yeah.
you connected with some good crews, and of course AWR is your main crew now. And I mean, of course, there were a lot of legendary crews back then. You know, we were talking about that: WCA, CBS, KSN, and others, K2S.
Yeah.
How much of an influence were those guys having on you?
I mean, I think they had a huge influence on me. It's like the goal was to get as many photos as possible. So it was about traveling and going to the yards and painting at the yards and getting these photographs. And they were like trading cards. So, you know, there's not just necessarily one person, but just an entire movement of people that really, you know, put it down. I would say Hex and Slick were two big ones, but, you know, Skill was a big one. Skill's burners, I think, were some of the best burners in LA I think I've ever seen were Skill. UTI, but Crush to me was always a big influence, you know, on home turf, and Tyke, early Tyke too, man, was just so over the top. Really advanced burners, and to be able to see those burners in person and be inspired by them, you know, I would say Crush was probably the biggest influence on me, you know, as far as like what I wanted to strive towards.
Right, so you weren't referencing New York as much, you were just more of the local writers?
Well, no, because the first things I got my hands on was spray can art and subway art, and then seeing Style Wars. So, you know, Phase 2 had a big influence on me. Vulcan's pieces early on, I was blown away by those pieces. So I would try to, you know, try to copy them as much as I could, you know, and try to like develop those books as much as possible. But I mean, spray can art was like a Bible to me, you know, like I looked at it like is the most important thing. Between that and Style Wars and seeing the intensity of it, and then being here in the 90s, you know, starting young and just trying to wrap my head around like what was happening on the street.
Tell me what that was like, you know, in terms of, because the 90s was, man, there was some heat going on in Los Angeles with the gang culture, the police brutality, a lot of risk involved in going to communities that you didn't belong to.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. Basically, it kind of just came down to the idea and the ethic of respect. So for me, I always knew when I was out of place, like that I had the right to, that they gave me the right to be there, basically. So it was about making those friendships and always trying to go out of my way to do my best, so that it showed that, like, you know, there's something behind, you know, there's a care aspect to it. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's painting in the day and then there's painting in the night. There's two totally different aspects. But, like, you know, painting in yards is painting in the day. And, like, I mean, some of those places were really sketchy. I mean, so some of the things that I happened to see were pretty over the top. But I was young, you know, and so my rule was always to try to paint my hardest, and anybody my size, if I had to like fight them or anything of that nature, like I would never back down. I would always step step, into the situation. I never really like looked back. I always just kind of jumped head first. So, I always tried to defend myself. I always had friends who were, kind of scary to me even at times.
So you wrote with a crew. Again, you wrote with some of the best writers in LA at that time. You also mentioned to me that you weren't like one of those writers that went after heavens, that you were really hitting bridges a lot.
I hit about 4 or 5 like bridges, but like I like the aspect of climbing and trying to get the pieces in a place where they were harder to remove, but also the idea of like painting something a little over the top in a place where it shouldn't be. I really loved that aspect to it. And that's where somebody like GK came into my life and really pushed me to, a way that was like, Fate doesn't get talked about in the sense that, Fate was the first to do a top to bottom, piece with rollers in the LA River. So he really inspired that aspect or that challenge. But Eclipse had one of the biggest influence on all of us, I would say.
And speaking of the LA River, we have a slide up of your piece in 3 different phases.
Right.
It's extraordinary. You're able to see this from satellite. We see over time people went over it, and that eventually, the Army Corps went over it. Tell us about this process. This is a huge ambition. Did you come out of pocket for it? What kind of support did you have?
Out of pocket, that was more about, pushing carts out at the time. So I just did anything I could to get my hands on paint. So any way I can get paint, I would try to get it. I would really go out of my way to get paint. But the idea of like having something just big and using gravity to pull the paint, the idea of like trying fill-ins and fill in like little shapes and trying to do an outline with a roller, like with black. I wanted to see what that felt like. And I knew once I started, I couldn't stop. I couldn't back down, because then I would feel weak. I would feel like I didn't accomplish the goal that I had set out in the beginning. And so, the knot that was in my stomach, the obsessive nature, the obsessive compulsive nature that I have when it comes to my process, I couldn't let it go. I just couldn't let it go. It drove me nuts. I couldn't sleep. It was literally I couldn't sleep.
Did you recruit anybody to help?
What was funny was I had these these kids that lived next to me. They were these suburban kids, a good Jewish family. They were like straight, like they were religious. They were good people. They were nice people. They always opened their home to me. They had no idea what I was up to, like most of the time. So one time I took them down to the river. I was like, "You want to go somewhere?" And so from that point on, the time that I took the kids down there, I actually fell in the river, and the older brother saved me. He pulled me out of the river after I tried to save this homeless dude, and then he pulled me in. And then once he pulled me in, the older brother ran like after me in the river. I'm like in the swamp, it's so nasty, it's sticky, and he reached and pulled and grabbed me and pulled me out, dude. And then we grabbed the other guy. And
I think people should know. We have a slide up that it's an aerial shot that shows how enormous this piece is. It's an amazing undertaking.
But I have to say though that the MTA piece that those guys did years later, I think one letter was the size of my piece, like it was just boom, boom.
So what do you think drives that ambition? Is it your ego, or is it you want to be the first, or is it just the exercise in painting?
I think it's all of the above, but really I love the process so much. It's like I can't get enough of the process. I want to know more. I want to understand more. I want to get better. Like I'm still not good enough. We're not good enough. I need to get better.
That was over a month of painting. It's a long time. That's a big commitment.
The thing is, though, is how erratic and dangerous it is down there. So there were a few times I got chased out, and you know, it's a really sketchy place. I mean, if you get injured, you know, no one's going to find you. You know, so and there's a lot of lurkers. So I couldn't let it go. I had to understand the river. Like I wanted to understand what the LA River, you know, really felt like. You know, not just once, but like to have it like burned in my memory. You know.
Eventually,
I took that photo too. I was able to run in and grab the photo.
Yeah. So how did that make you feel when you see that you're getting buffed out of this historic space?
I was happy. I was ecstatic.
Explain that to me. Why were you ecstatic?
Well, number one, these idiots didn't know that I already put oil base over the outline. So I went back and I put 26 gallons of Rust-Oleum oil base. So any water base that they have is just going to protect it for the next fucking, you know, 50 years. So I'm like, fuck it, go buff it. Plus it kind of allowed me to walk away from it to a certain degree because it was a big responsibility. Because if anybody dissed it, I'm forced to engage it, and you know it
definitely got dissed quite a lot.
It left me open, you know. I mean, when I did it, I didn't realize, like, you know, I didn't think I was really gonna. I knew a part of me was gonna do it, but there's a big part of me that I always fight, and that's the part that doubts myself, you know. So that's the one that doubts myself is the one that causes the anxiety. And then once I get that anxiety over something, I have to face it. I have to accomplish it. I have to.
Well, you're in LA, a place that definitely incites anxiety for sure, despite the sunny weather, right? Especially writing at that time, right? Because you had the ghetto birds, you had cliques in all these neighborhoods. This painting you did is quite beautiful in terms of the color and the sense of what LA was at night. But people don't realize the danger involved in terms of being a writer in LA.
No, I mean, even some people have been hurt recently, and I mean, it's just part. And when we painted this, it was me and Revoke, and we were painting it, and we painted it in the day because we sort of got permission to do it, but not really. And so we started painting it, and it's right on the 101, and the helicopter started circling us. And so I was almost done with it. So I started pointing to the helicopter and then pointing to him. So as he's circling over the 101, he gives me the thumbs up, and then we were cool. So we were
funny. So one of the other things I want to discuss with you is Melrose. And Melrose in LA at that time was, it's a shopping district, but it was also kind of like this long layup for you guys. There was so many murals, and I was fortunate enough to live in LA in the 90s for a period of time, so I got to see a lot of that work. What did Melrose represent to you guys when you first started hitting there? And first off, who was hitting it before you? Who established that?
I mean, that was CBS's, kind of that was their neighborhood, and I had the honor of meeting Skate actually, you know, spending a little time with him a couple times. And man, he was such a massive figure. Skate was like the most G dude there was, man. And you know, that was a big tragedy, and it was a big tragedy for LA
Yeah.
and for CBS, you know, but CBS always was one of the most talented crews. You know, Mir was a big influence on me. CBS painted a lot, man. I mean, these guys painted so much, and they did a lot of great graffiti, and they put in a lot of work. But skate kind of held a balance between the city. It was like these kingpins, you know what I'm saying? And like, I was young, so Skate was this huge figure. I think the first time I met Skate, this is a funny little story. I'm painting in Calabasas, okay, underneath the tunnel. I'm like 14 or 15, and all of a sudden this giant man like comes up behind me. He looks like a Hell's Angels type dude, long hair. He's like giant, and he stands behind me, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Your piece is small." And I turn around, I'm like, oh my God, is this guy gonna kill me or what? And then he turns and he looks and he goes, "You must do it big to impress." And that's when I was like, whoa. So Skate was the first one to tell me. He said, "You must do it big to impress." And that burned in my memory from that day on. You know what I'm saying?
And that you did. You know, of course, the LA River piece was huge. One of the other things that was really intriguing to me was the style that was developing out in LA that departed from the structure of lettering that was happening in New York and elsewhere on the East Coast, right? That you guys were more illustrative, more daring with colors at time, with shading. And of course, we can accredit that to Hex and Slick, some of the things they were innovating. Yeah. And in terms of style, I was always curious as to how you were developing these styles early on. And you know, one of the things we had talked about was where were those influences coming from? You know, where were those visual cues coming from?
I mean, right off the bat, it's spray can art and subway art, you know, is key in kind of planting the alchemy of the idea. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the rules of the idea, and then LA kind of had its own tension and its own madness happening. Quite frankly, I really love gang graffiti. I love ugly, fast tags. You know, I love tags that are like, you know, the length of whole walls. And all of a sudden you start seeing these same little rules in the street graffiti that then can apply to how you would address a wild style. So, you know, and then you can go through that list. So it's like if you go through kind of the gang style list also translates because it's you know, it's angular and you have all these big stretches and these characters that are built within each of the letters. I think that's why Sao Paulo's style, with the complexity of how they approach their individual letters, there's a similar language in that. I think Sao Paulo's taken it to a whole other level, but the idea that there's these characters within each of these letters,
right? And it's interesting
that you go in any direction.
It's interesting to say character because there's a couple things that I see in all this. One is decorative, one is organic, one is sci-fi. It's almost it's capturing all these other elements that again were not the same, that weren't typographic driven like New York was in the same way, that there was this organic style. you had mentioned to me the influence of McFarlane with Spawn, things like that,
Yeah.
art like that, and also this guy Chaz, how Chaz was so influential when you met him, in terms of
Yeah.
how you guys were starting to think outside the box.
Well, too, I think including a brush, now that I kind of look at where that goes as far as maybe where the organic side came, I think a lot of it had to do with being near the millennium. So that whole idea of the future kind of smashed in our heads and living through it. But then two, including the brush. So all of a sudden you include a brush in your letter structure, you start getting these obviously more organic shapes because the spray is locked in in the way it approaches. So I think when we started doing the whips with the brushes and the stretches and the serifs and all these things, started giving these like shapes that were almost like plants or trees or something, but with that like you said, that sci-fi aspect to it.
When you were actually in practice with that, did the purists kind of knock you for that, for trying to be quote unquote artsy?
No, not at the time, because everybody was, as far as crew aspects, there was a balance. So everybody kind of embraced, if you pieced and you took real estate on the freeway, everybody was kind of cool with each other, to a certain degree. It was more like outsiders or other characters that kind of like started beef. But I mean,
tell me a little bit about this Sabre piece I'm looking at, and how
that's in Mexico. I think that's in Mexico.
That's in Mexico. So
I think it's it might be Mexicali.
Because there's a lot of that's baked into this piece, right? The sci-fi,
Yeah.
the organic. I mean, it is a name. You can if you know letter forms, there is your name is obviously in there.
Well, too, it's about the aspect of the character. So you have these little heads, you have these big bellies, you have these long tails, you have these big feet. It's about these little heads, and once you start building things from these little heads, then you start building out this structure that almost has a sci-fi aspect to it, because the way it's already leaning. Once something's leaning, it kind of gives it that momentum, you know what I'm saying, that speed. But then the whole aspect of creatures, like, instead of doing a physical character, I wanted the piece to have a feel to it. Not necessarily anything identifiable, but like there is almost like a character in the, each one of the heads is its own entity, it's its own life. And then too, this aspect of temples, So you look at, like, I was really influenced by, help me out, in Barcelona. Made the cathedrals.
Oh, Gaudi.
Thank you.
Antonio Gaudi.
The Gaudi was a big influence. Salvador Dali, once I first discovered those things. But the idea of illumination, something that has kind of a spirit within it, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to get all Jesus out here, or like,
not at
like
all.
it's something more,
right?
But it's an inspiration. It's a form of inspiration. It gives it a mode to tap into, to then say that I want it to be special. I want it to be something a little more than what I expect out of myself,
Right, and you advance on those ideas, and again, you know, with this particular project that you did, it's a big parking lot, where perhaps it's not about the name. It's all about the action. It's about the movement of paint and the line. And again,
I mean, there's a lot of that fighting aspect, you know, a lot of fighting aspect, a lot of blockings and whippings, and you know, the crowns are really important. So they're always like, there's always something blocking them from the back. It's just the idea of building out this feeling or this life entity within the letters. And then I think once I discovered the pattern aspect of it, or the texture aspect of it, it was able to free me from the name itself. You know what I'm saying? But
that's a powerful
when it's on
thing
the
to
street,
say, to be freed
what's
of
that?
your, that's a powerful thing to say, to be freed of your name. In many ways, as some of the artists of our genre, you know, they start out as writers and they kind of seek that, right, to kind of grow into something that's not just their name, that it's actually the process of their work.
Right.
So
with process is the journey is the most important part. The process is the most important part, and because without the process, you don't learn all those nuggets that you're searching for. You know what I'm saying? That you strive for.
And that search, bro, do you find that part of it was to not just the work, but to gain infamy?
Well, at the time, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was like the first, you know, like then, especially when you're young, you know, it's like, I mean, all my energy goes to my kids right now. This is why, you know, I look like this right now.
Right.
But
well, that's a good segue when we start thinking about infamy, because writers want to get up and they want to get known. And now we're at a time where we are celebrated, we're known, and we both commodify ourselves and also get commodified. And you got immortalized. You got your own spray can. And who would have thought that when you were a kid? And
you know what's funny about that is I didn't feel confident enough to do an original piece of work for the graphics, so Eclipse re-illustrated it, because guys like Crush and Eclipse and Cokes were like master illustrators on the computer. So he created the graphic for me because I wasn't confident enough to do the original work. That's a little
that's a
backstory.
Nice little crew backup. It's always good.
Yeah.
You venture into metal. This is a good segue into something that's really really interesting for me. Is that we were talking about this earlier, right? About sculpture. And I saw this Sabre sculpture in New York for the Guernsey's auction. And I was blown away. I thought it was incredible. I was like, oh, great, another person coming into this genre. And I was kind of always anticipating that you would do more of it. We talked earlier about you going to the San Francisco Art Institute, where you were hoping to study sculpture. Let's talk about San Francisco and the impact San Francisco had on you, both in the art school and in the streets.
I mean, San Francisco definitely, it was a way for me to get away from LA at the time. And it was a destination point for me and Revoke. Fate was there. And then you had guys like Barry. I mean, you have a whole rich history there, but I would say Dream is a big influence on those big wild styles. So Oakland, and it was like we wanted to just come and paint as much as we could, and just see what happens. And San Francisco is such a unique place. Wasn't expecting it to affect me in the way that it had, because you know, a lot went down when we were there, you know, guys like Ty and just a lot. And it's a wild city, so we got to experience a new aspect. I wish I got more out of the school, but I don't think it was worth what it was at the time. And I think I was too focused still on graffiti, you know. So
yeah, it's funny because that's something you and I share. You know, going into art school, university, and realizing we don't fit in, and discovering how much we love this art. We see the art in the art form we practice.
Right. I couldn't get enough of graffiti at the time. I wasn't done. I wasn't ready to embrace something new. I was trying, but I wasn't ready myself. And,
how were you viewing Twist and the Mission School? Those kids that were coming up at that time.
Well, I mean, Barry was you know, a big influence on the city, and Margaret, you know, she was a great person, and Art was fantastic, and really nice people. And I got to become close with them amongst, you know, the city itself through Ty's death, and it kind of brought us all together to a certain degree. And that was kind of a real dark, emotional time to kind of go through something like that. But the whole city was there together. You know, I actually called that motherfucker once who killed him. I actually called him.
And what was that like?
You know, I told him how I felt. You know, I found him and I called him, and that was pretty emotional. You know, I wanted to tell him how I felt. But at the end of the day, that's all it was. You know, some old ass man.
And so why did you leave San Francisco? Why didn't you just stay there and continue?
It just got too toxic, you know. It was so toxic, and it was in a transition, and too much has happened, and it just, you know, I lived right in Market and 6. Me and Revoke had the lowest window to the ground. To Stevenson Murder Alley is what the locals called it. And you know, I mean, the madness that I witnessed out that window, you know, that I had enough. I was like, I've had enough of this. And I knew it was time to go back. It was time to go back to LA.
At that point, were you considering or practicing on canvas and thinking about perhaps the graph could be a way into the art market?
You know, I never thought that graffiti could be a way into the art market, because I didn't know anything, you know, what that was. But I knew that graffiti would give me tools that would allow me to apply to other situations. So I would get production jobs, or you know, detail jobs, or I would get hired to paint something for somebody. And so those were some of my first aspects of the business, was just somebody that had basic interests that said, hey, will you paint this, you know, pretty scene in my house? And I'd be like, all right, you know, for sure. You know, like at the time it was, you know, there was nothing happening other than, you know, there were companies doing things, but, you know, there was no way to make a living, you know, off anything like that. So I would get jobs doing interesting work. So for instance, like in San Francisco, I got a job gold leafing. So we would gold leaf ceilings and kind of refurbish the old gold leaf on the old buildings and old pillars in San Francisco. So I was able to kind of learn a lot about gold leafing, you know, through these jobs of doing faux finishing. I was doing a lot of faux finishing jobs. You know, I liked faux finishing jobs because I found them easy, you know, like, and I enjoyed doing them. You know, I enjoyed doing creative work. So I would seek out creative work and then lie about my graffiti, in the sense that
Why?
I would say I was a muralist.
Mm.
So
Was
once
graffiti
they
a
would
dirty
ask
word?
for something, well then, yeah, I mean, that was like, well, for sure, guaranteed. Like, I would then slip them like I would have a photo, you know, or I would have something on me to show, you know. So once they would see like the complexity of like a piece, they would always, you know, they would be excited about it. But until then, until I had the opportunity to like show them, to let them understand the complexities, you know, it was a really dirty word, you know, and you know, tagger. It was like the ugliest word to
Tag
the media.
bangers. So let's talk about that in LA, because that was a new thing for me when I was out there. I was
Oh
like,
my
what's
God.
a tag banger? I've never heard this term.
Oh my God.
School us on that.
Hey, it was like this. So guys like OFA, okay, out for action. All right, these guys were no joke, dude. I'm telling you. One time we ran into these guys, and they were like 200 deep, like 200, like a caravan of human beings, all with bald heads, all with tails, all with giant pants, like ready to fucking terrorize.
What neighborhood are you
And
coming out of?
that was off Santa Fe in downtown in the Arts District. That was near the Santa Fe Yard, the old Santa Fe Yard that was there. And I never seen anything like it. Like I was shook, dude. I was like, and they actually were nice. They were like, "Hey, how you doing, Sabre? Nice to meet you." I was like, "Oh my God, these guys are gonna fucking kill us." A couple times, like, you know, these crews grew these infamy, and it was all about that infamy. You know what I'm saying? And the infamy was what a lot of people were chasing. So there was so many crews to start from that you can't even begin, like the layers and layers of these guys. And a lot of it had to do with the original Fox News tagger specials, where they really amplified all that aspect of it and blew it up on the news and made a huge thing about it. And, you know, that excited a lot of people to be like, damn, we could get on the news. So everybody, you know, everybody was just, there was no boundaries. It was like.
But were writers banging on each other, or was it just the cliques that were just banging as normal?
I mean, it was people then. I mean, anything was fair game at that point. I mean, people were getting hurt. It was a scary time, quite frankly. And a lot of it, I would say, really had to do with the California penal system, had to do with the juvenile system, had to do with DARE. You know, I saw recently they tried to bring DARE back at my house. I was like, get the fuck out of here. Fuck you. You know, the whole criminalization of youth, and then having the facilities, you know, these mega facilities, you know, birth this culture. That's you know, that's.
I'm glad you bring that up, because LA has such a really harsh penal system for young folks, especially Black and brown folks, and any disorderly conduct, minor or major, puts you through the system.
And back then it was about quotas. So they really went out of their way to get everybody, you know, in jail, and it was a scary time when you think about it, because too, you had crack on the street, so you had this like this troll that's everywhere, you know, that just was destroying everything, and it made people dangerous. It made places dangerous.
How did you avoid getting swept up by that? Was it just that you guys would just focus on graph?
I was just focused on graph primarily. I mean, I got into plenty of incidences. I got into a lot of incidences. I knew when it was time to go, you know what I'm saying? I knew when it was time to leave. And then I knew when it was time to fight. And so I would always try to get out of the situation, especially with people that were ready to kill at the time, you know? I mean, that really consumed the city. It really was this dark cloud that was over the entire city, because even when you didn't want tragedies or traumas in your life, they still appeared, you know?
No more than one of the biggest ones, rather, is the Rodney King verdict, which turned the city upside down. It was devastating.
That was wild, and quite frankly, it could happen at any time. You saw Minneapolis last night.
That's correct.
You know what I'm saying? And
Correct.
it's I don't know what's going to happen right now, obviously, but you know,
well,
there's a lot of injustice when you really think about it. It's
right,
something that has to be addressed.
Right, and as
know?
artists, you know, we're not just on the sidelines. We have the power and the creativity to address it. So,
Right.
I want to take a moment to pause and let everybody know that we're going to go into another part 2 of this, because we've been talking for about an hour very casually, and I'm glad we got this part of it. I really want to start surveying all the amazing paintings and work that you've discovered through this journey. So folks, I want you all to just hang tight, and I'm going to sign off and just save the video and come back on. So stay put for me, Sabre. Don't go anywhere.